You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button.
Wilson Alexander is reporting former Missouri defensive analyst Jake Olson will be LSU's safeties coach, rounding out the on-field defensive staff, the fifth hire the last 2 weeks. Again, none of this is official yet from LSU. I think that's important to note. Like, the only assistant coach hires that LSU has formally announced are Blake Baker and Bo Davis. That's it. We've got the reports about Kevin Peoples and Corey Raymond and Jake Olson, but nothing official from LSU yet. So obviously we have to wait and see what the finality is. I certainly trust that Wilson Alexander's got good info here. And it was Billy Embody last week who had reported that Jake Olson came with Blake Baker from Missouri. So he's actually been here a couple of weeks already. But now we learned his role. And that was the interesting part, because as we've talked about the LSU staff, remember, this is the conversation we've had. And I understand that for some of you, this sounds repetitive because I say this over and over, but it's important to note when we have this conversation about the staff. Yes, who you add is important, but how you structure it matters as well. It's not like an NFL staff where you can have as many on-field coaches as you want, whatever roles that you want. You have 10 on-field assistants in college. So as you start to look through it and how it may be structured, one of the things that I know Brian Kelly was initially considering was having a full-time special teams coordinator, a dedicated special teams coordinator. Well, Jake Olson had worked as a special teams coach throughout his career. We talked about his bio. On the show yesterday, we had Eli Wolf here, who covers Missouri, and we talked a little bit about all the guys, the three guys from Missouri that LSU's added. But Jake Olson is a guy that has ties to Louisiana, having been at Nichols and ULM and Northwestern State. He was at LSU for a year. That year with Baker, Baker got let go, goes to Missouri as the DC, brings Olson with him where he's been. So that was a possibility. But now when you look at the offensive side, so you've got Blake Baker, who's going to, as I've told you, is going to coach linebackers. That was what we told from the beginning. Bo Davis will coach your defensive line. Kevin Peoples will coach your ends and your edge position. Corey Raymond will coach your corners, and apparently Olson will coach your safeties. Okay, that's 5 on-field defensive assistants. You look at the offensive side, you've got Cortez Hankton coaching your receivers. You've got Joe Sloan coaching your quarterbacks. You've got Brad Davis coaching your offensive line. And you have to consider Frank Wilson, of course, coaching your running backs. And you have to have a tight ends coach. So I've given you the names that I've been told, and there's two. It's Slade Nagel at Tulane and John McNulty, who was an analyst at Bama this past year and was Brian Kelly's tight ends coach at Notre Dame for a couple of seasons. I think it'll be one of those two guys. The other possibility would have been if you hired an offensive coordinator that could also coach tight ends. That's what Mike Denbrock did. But as we've talked about here, the push the past several weeks, there's just gaining momentum behind the idea of Sloan, Hankton, co-OCs, which you saw in the bowl game, Sloan calling plays, hire a tight ends coach. Well, if you do that, you don't have a special teams coordinator. So you're back to that spot where you're divvying up special teams roles again, unless Brian Kelly's got another plan somewhere. And I don't know what it might be. Maybe it's someone who coaches special teams, tight ends. Maybe Olson, having a background in special teams, could do that role. Don't know. So, yes, who you add is very important. And as we've talked about, it's clear Brian Kelly is assembling a staff of great recruiters and technical skilled coaches. Bo Davis and Kevin Peoples are some of the most highly regarded defensive line coaches. We know Brad Davis has done an incredible job with that offensive line. And it's so funny, too, how many people were critical of Brad Davis at the beginning of last season. And I had to remind you over and over again, 6 different line combinations in 8 games. 2 true freshman bookend tackles. How quickly they ramped up and became dominant this year is super impressive. But you understand, LSU has a great staff of technical coaches, but it doesn't matter how great your coaching is if you don't have players. You're still going to have a lower ceiling. You got to get players. And what they've done is they've assembled an incredible staff of recruiters to go along with the technical ability that these coaches have. But how they structure the offensive side will be interesting, and what they do with special teams kind of is really the question remaining. Do you add a tight ends coach? If so, then how do you divvy up the special teams duties? That seems to be the biggest question that remains here for LSU heading into to the 2024 season as it pertains to their staff. Okay, it's after further. So again, the news, if you missed it, Wilson Alexander is reporting that LSU, that Jake Olson, who and hat tip Billy Embody, he had that Olson was on staff last week, but Wilson is reporting that Olson will be the safeties coach. So that finishes your defensive staff. Now, who coaches? What do you do at OC? Who coaches tight ends? What do you do with special teams? Those are the questions we still need to get answered.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.